Go ahead.
Yeah, a short and simple question to the panel. Can the truth ever constitute hate speech? Thank you.
Okay.
Your question was very interesting. Can truth be a speech of hate? It's like a philosophic essay. We can spend much time talking about. My answer is yes. I think the truth can sometimes be speech. Can fuel it. Why? Simply because sometimes truth is awful.
So yeah, I was going to say now, Henrik asked this question, can truth constitute hate speech? So, I mean, this is, would you like to, or Simon? It does, in fact, it does, it can, absolutely. But it doesn't mean we should ignore it.
I had a temptation to say no, never. But I imagine, let's, one day my wife bought something that, up to my observation, was not good to her. And if I say to her the truth, would it be hate speech from my side? Yeah. Therefore, yes, my reply is no. Still.
Yeah, truth sometimes hurts. Would anyone, or shall we pass to the other question? No?
I think I'll go to another question.
Okay. I think there's a thin line of how things are based on, but you were saying something also about religion, if I may comment here. It's the responsibility of the media is to clarify some things in order to have less of this hate speech, because there is misunderstanding about so many things concerning religion, and it's too easy to just stereotype it and have it, because you want to do it quickly, you want to put a background, so you take a background where you can find so many errors and specifications that are not there.
Yeah, and just sometimes we use the word moderate. He's a moderate Muslim. This is the kind of expression I really feel like we should ban from our, speech, because what is a moderate Muslim? No, it's like we are Muslim or we are terrorists, but moderate Muslim to me sounds bad, although I can...
Yeah, because we never hear moderate Christian, for example.
Yeah.
It's but it became part of the conversation now, and those are the stereotypes that we were trying to mention when we were talking about religion. Now there is Ante that had a multiple question, in fact, that comes back to, correct me if I'm wrong, to hate. You are also pointing at this, right? I mean, is there anyone who would like to comment on his question about truth and hate? Yes, yeah.
I mean, I'm going to sort of become sophist about it, I'm afraid, because the point is that it's, direct and black and white questions like that cannot have black and white answers. I mean, truth is a perception in many cases, whose truth is perceived by who, and that's the problem. And I think when it comes to the relationship between truth and hate speech, I think what Donia is saying is that once there is an overt call for violent acts, that's when the red line is crossed. The discussion about, whether reporting on events and stories in a way which points guilt and fingers at different communities, that's a difficult issue. And I think it's, it's something that's much more complicated. It goes back to the whole question of actually, the way these things are reported. I mean, I was a soldier for a long time, and one of the things that is always interesting is actually when you see reports on incidents, military incidents, somebody will give you a very different view of an event that took place depending what side of the hill they were on when they saw it. And so, that person is absolutely convinced that the event took place in this way, and the other person sitting on the other side of the hill will give you an absolutely different version of the same event, and they are convinced that that's the truth. So I think we have to be careful about that, and it's about reporting it in the balanced way if possible. But I'd like to return to the last question. And this is a huge issue. And Scott and I actually were talking about this earlier, and it's a very difficult thing to get into. But the problem is that yes, educated people do become involved in terrorism. I mean, this is not an Islamic thing. I mean, we just have to go back to the Red Brigades, the Baader Meinhof, the IRA. I mean, these aren't necessarily down to religion. It's about people looking for a cause and needing to reject the system with which they find themselves in. The first thing I think we need to understand that actually this is a small phenomena. Despite the fact that it predominates in the media, actually the numbers of people who actually go to do these things as a percentage of the communities that we are talking about is tiny. And I think these are the sorts of things that we need to understand. And the problem is that what is the narrative that we are offering to talk up our own society's values? And I think this is something that has been lost in the developed world, is our ability to advocate and speak on behalf of the things that we're talking about here, and the whole question of universal values. The trouble is that we look at it in terms of national or regional values. And I was in the UN the other day talking to the head of the task force, the Global Counterterrorist Task Force in the UN, about this precise issue. And what the UN are trying to do is to try and think about what should be a global narrative that basically sets down a perception of universal values which everybody, no matter where they come from and what their religious position, should adhere to. And that to give some form of counterbalance to these very narrow things. And that's a huge undertaking, and it will take a long time. But I think, there has become a sort of devaluation of our own liberal values in our societies, which we need to talk up. Thank you.
So, my name is Rania Mati. I'm a law student, and I would like to go back to the Randa's statement. If the truth can be hate speech, would hiding the truth mean tackling today's horrifying terror?
Sorry, can you?
If the truth can be a hate speech, would hiding the truth mean tackling today's horrifying terror?
Last question, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Oh, we forgot you. No, I have to. Sorry, 2 questions then, yeah.
Yes.
I apologize.
Steve Coughlin, Pax Europa. My question is, it seems to me that what's going on is there's an attempt to establish a meta-narrative on how to talk about events such that non-conforming opinions then get branded as hate speech that get pushed down. And this meta-narrative is established by a media-government relationship in which there's an agreement that you're going to then propagandize a public. And the reason I put it that way is because once you decide that facts on the ground, as they present themselves, can be considered hate speech, this is no longer about truth in any sense of the word, capital T, small t. This isn't about a guy on one side of the hill seeing the bullets coming and saying, that's my reality, that's a total truth, and the guy firing saying, I fired, that's a total truth, and we can kind of arbitrate between the facts what happened. This is about confabulating a narrative and then deciding to impose it on people and designating people who don't agree as haters. Once you decide that facts can be hate, what distinguishes this from just disinformation of the purest form? That's the question I would like to ask.
Thank you. I just need your first name. Is it Steve?
Stephen.
Yeah, Stephen, sorry. Okay. And
I believe that truth can be not always, but truth can constitute hate speech, because sometimes truth is difficult, horrible in itself. So Simon actually gave a piece of answer earlier, saying that sometimes when you report on facts and these facts point out a community, then it can be a source of hateful speech. So your question was, does that mean that hiding the truth would be a mean to tackle the hate speech? I would answer, sometimes it is. And sometimes we do, by not saying the entire truth. And it sometimes takes the form of the politiquement correct. For example, in France, you are not allowed in the polls, the survey, to integrate the race, the religion, the ethnic ground of the people, because you don't want it to be eventually used in hate speech. So yes, sometimes it is used that way. But not always. If you talk about this specific issue of radicalism, I'm not talking about it. This is why I said sometimes it can be a source of hate speech, and sometimes we can prefer not to mention it. This is what someone said just behind
Stephen,
you,
I think.
and it's very interesting, and I think all this is linked. Now, how is the limit between this and misinformation? I think that's the word you use.
Well, Stephen said the narrative of the hate speech, the facts on the ground. How can you once decide that facts can be hate, right?
Yeah, that's a very tricky question. You cannot. You just decide how you can say things. But
I mean, he has a very legitimate point. Yeah. I mean, if we consider some of the facts are hate speech, then we're hiding facts or we're taking judgment beforehand, right? That's what you were saying, Stephen.
What I'm saying is, for example, I didn't name ISIS the Islamic State. They did.
Yeah.
I didn't take territory. They did. I didn't bring people under my governance. They did. I didn't do all these things. They did. And for you to say we can't call them the Islamic State when in fact they are, and that they're executing what they're calling Sharia law against the people who are actually dead because it happened, that's a material misrepresentation of an actual fact. And you are leading the public by not representing that. If you're saying it's hate speech to know what they're doing, the hate would be on the actor, not on people being aware of it. This is that would be a deliberate attempt to mislead the public on something they might or might not take an interest. You're gauging what hate is based on how people might appropriately respond to something they could reasonably consider to be a threat. And that is the exact opposite of what a free press is supposed to do. You're subordinating facts that the public has a right to know when they formulate their decisions and replacing them with narratives to keep them from coming to the understanding of events that can be articulated and verified. That can never be considered hate speech. And when it is, we're not talking about speech at all. We're talking about brazen disinformation.
No, I'm not saying this is a totally valid point, and actually it's a question I ask myself very often when I see the way news are addressed. That does not mean I agree with it. And I mean, with the Islamic State, I was the one saying that they're calling themselves Muslims, so we should call them Muslim terrorists. This is what they call themselves, this is what they are, but also we must say that they are terrorists, not only Muslim. And this is why I link to the moderate point. I totally understand what we mean when we say moderate Islam. It's just that I don't agree with it, because it's like saying she's a Muslim, but hey, she's okay, you know?
You're saying I cannot call people who oppose Muslims who
You're saying I cannot oppose people who oppose ISIS by calling them moderate. I'm just saying the same rule should apply to ISIS. I don't have a dog in that hunt. I would say that the side that wins will define Islam for that part of the world, regardless of whether whatever population agrees or disagrees with it. And not knowing that can lead to bad decisions.
On journalistic ethics, I have to agree with Stephen on the fact that in particular, when it comes to journalism, written journalism, which is different from a TV show where you are more free of expressing things, you cannot call somebody a terrorist unless somebody calls them a terrorist and you put it between quotes. You are obliged to say the Islamic...
I mean, we call someone a terrorist when he perpetuates acts of terror.
Yes, but you have a group and they have a name. I mean, you cannot add the word terrorist. You can, outside the code, then add it for different reasons. Well, anyhow, this is a vicious circle here. Now, we finished with the questions, but... No, I did not come to you yet. I'm talking to the lady behind you. Yes.
Sorry, because I have something to add.
Okay, go ahead.
I mean, I'm, as I said, a law student, and I know very well what our laws constitute. And the thing you talked about, you are not talking about facts. I mean, protecting people on because of their ethnical background or religious or whatever. These are not facts. We were talking about facts. Could a truth as a fact be a hate speech? And you said yes, and by your answering, you didn't answer. You just switched to something very
think
totally
we're going in
We can
different.
have a
circles
coffee
here.
if you want. Maybe you did not get my
you-
point. We can have a coffee later.
I think you can
can
do
talk
that because we
outside.
have still to answer.